Sorry, guys. Sorry. Sorry.
Come closer.
What's going on, Daddy?
Open the goddamn door! I can't get away. I can't stop. I'll just do this one last one. Enjoy the rest of the concert.
Trap is the newest horror thriller film to hit theaters, and it's directed by M. Night Shyamalan. And anytime I hear M. Night's name attached to a film, I can't help but get excited for the movie. He gave us movies like The Village. He gave us movies like Signs, Unbreakable, The Sixth Sense. Those are movies that have incredible twist endings to them. They're movies that every time I view them a little bit differently. And they're movies that have stuck with me for the majority of my life. I love those four movies. And so anytime I hear M. Night's name, I'm like, are we going to get another one of those kind of movies? But he's also given us sort of middle of the road films like The Visit, which was fine. It was sort of a return to form for M. Night after he gave us a couple bad ones. And he gave us the movie Knock at the Cabin last year, which I enjoyed. Wasn't my favorite movie from him, and I wish we'd gotten a little bit more out of that ending. It sort of told you what it was up front, and then there was nothing else added onto it, and that was sort of disappointing just because I've known M. Night as someone who gives you a twist to the end of the film, and so I was hoping we were going to get something like that. But then you also have movies like Lady in the Water from him, Glass, which sort of ruined what Split did, although I guess I could throw Split in those great M. Night movies because that is a really great film. But then you have movies like Glass, and then most recently he gave us Old, and that was such a disappointment. So I don't really know where to gauge my expectations for M. Night anymore. But then it was announced that this movie would star Josh Hartnett as Cooper, and I got very excited for that because Josh Hartnett used to be in movies like Halloween H2O, The Faculty, 30 Days of Night. Those are movies that I absolutely love. And since last year when he popped up in the movie Oppenheimer, I got excited for the Josh Hartnett resurgence, and you definitely get that in this film. So I was happy to see that Josh Hartnett was in this movie. Now in this film, he plays a character named Cooper, and he's the dad to Riley, played by Ariel Donahue, and Riley and Cooper are going to a Lady Raven concert. Lady Raven is played by M. Night Shyamalan's daughter, Salika Shyamalan, and I love that he's putting his daughters into films or getting them involved in the industry that he loves, and to an extent helped craft the sort of twist ending that audiences would come to expect from him and other directors going forward. So I love that he put her in this film, but I'll get to more of that in my positives in a little bit. But again, you have Cooper and Riley going to this Lady Raven concert, and they get there and there's this nice sweet dynamic between maybe a dad in his 40s and his young teenage daughter. And what's cool about that is it's something that we can sort of relate to as a culture, because you do have things like Taylor Swift having these huge concerts and all the girls calling themselves the Swifties and their dads being the Swiftie dads, and there'll be these hordes of dads outside of Taylor Swift concerts waiting on their daughters, or you'll see the videos of the dads dancing with their daughters at the Taylor Swift concerts. And so there's something that not only is a little bit appealing there, but something that you can relate to there. You can say, hey, that's something you actually see. This isn't a weird dynamic. Like, dads do take their young teenage daughters to Taylor Swift concerts. So in this film, when they're going to see Lady Raven, again, it's just believable. And I liked what M. Night did there. As the movie progresses, Cooper starts to notice that there's a lot of police presence, like more than there normally is at a concert. And so one thing leads to another, and he befriends this t-shirt stand guy, and he's like, hey, what's up with all the police presence? What's going on right now? And the guy's like, well, I'm not supposed to say anything, but do you know that serial killer known as the Butcher that's going around slicing people up? Well, the police got a tip that he's gonna be here tonight at this concert. So they set this whole concert up as a trap for the Butcher. Now, this next part that I'm gonna say is not a spoiler. This is something that was told in the trailers and is very important to me telling you the synopsis of the film. So again, I don't wanna hear that it's spoilers. So at this point of the movie, when you hear that the Butcher is the reason that the police are all there and the reason this whole concert was sort of set up in the first place, you find out, or you know as the audience member at this point, that Josh Hartnett's character of Cooper is the Butcher, and he now feels like he is trapped within this concert, and he has to make it his mission to get out by any means necessary. And so begins this sort of cat and mouse game between the police, the FBI, and an FBI profiler looking for Cooper at this concert, and his struggle to get out with his daughter and keep his sort of secret identity hidden from everyone. Now, if that sounds like an interesting concept to you, you should check this movie out in theaters. Don't just take my word for it. Remember, if you watch somebody talk about movies online and they say something's good or bad, that's not necessarily going to be your experience. So if that sounds like a fun time to you, if you just like M. Night Shyamalan films, well, I would tell you, go see this thing in theaters. Check it out on a big screen, because there's moments in this movie that I think are really fun, but there's also moments in this movie that are not so good. Let's get into my positives and some of my negatives. The first positive I have, I sort of touched on this already, but it's Josh Hartnett coming back. I love that Josh Hartnett's getting a little bit of a resurgence, and I hope he's in more of these sort of horror thriller films, because that's what I knew him from back in the day. It was cool seeing him pop up in Oppenheimer. I was like, oh shoot, Josh Hartnett's in this movie. That's so cool. But I think his place is the horror thriller genre, and so I'd like to see him in more of them going forward. So it was cool seeing him back in this, but I really loved his energy that he brought in this film. Regardless of how this film winds up, or what I'm going to say in my negatives later about this movie in general, I think that his performance carries this entire movie no matter what. If you say, well, what about Josh Hartnett's performance? I'd be like, oh, well, it's one of the best performances I've seen all year. And I do mean that. I think that his performance in this film as Cooper, as this serial killer trying to get away but keep his secret identity hidden from the outside world, and especially from his daughter, I think that his character is great, and I got these Patrick Bateman vibes from him. It's kind of hard to explain, but there's a moment where he's with these police officers and they're just surrounding him, not knowing that he's the killer, and he's getting some coffee, and he starts to scoot past them. And I think this moment was actually in the trailer, but he's scooting past them, and you see the smile on his face, and as he bumps through the police, as he gets more and more towards the door, you can see that smile just start to go away, and he gets this angry look on his face, like, I've got to get out of here. And so there's just something desperate about his character in this film that reminds me of Patrick Bateman, and I think that Josh Hartnett did a fantastic job, so I just wanted to point that out. That leads me to my next positive, and that is Salika Shyamalan being in this film. I thought she did a great job as Lady Raven, the pop singer. I believe she also is a recording artist, like she is a pop singer in general, so this just sort of worked for her. But I love that M. Night Shyamalan put his daughter in this film. We got a film called The Watchers earlier this year from M. Night Shyamalan's other daughter, and he helped produce that film. And as a dad of three, and two of those three being girls, I just think it's wonderful that he's helping his daughters get into this industry that he helped craft, this industry that he has done so much for, and he's putting his daughters in there. And the Shyamalan name will sort of live on through his daughters in these films. And I don't know, again, as a dad, that's just a really sweet and touching thing for me. And so while that may not be something that's on a lot of people's list of positives for this film, it is to me as a dad. I just think that's really sweet, and I love seeing it. And my final positive for this movie is going to be the cat and mouse chase between the police and Cooper throughout the first half of this film, because the movie works for me in the first half of this movie when it is in the arena during the Lady Raven concert. And don't quote me on it, it might be a little more than half of the film, but just whatever's inside the concert from the time they are in traffic getting to the concert and the time that they are leaving the concert, this movie worked for me 100%. I was watching this film in the theater thinking to myself, I saw negative reviews for this thing, but I don't understand, where is the negative, because this movie is great. For me, it was firing on all cylinders. I thought it was fantastic. I thought that the idea of this serial killer trying to keep his identity hidden and stay away from the police and finding these unique and clever ways to get through different situations. Sometimes he was causing harm to different individuals so he could see if there was a break in where the police were going to be watching. I loved watching that in this film, and for me, the first half of this movie is one of M. Night Shyamalan's best. I mean that. If you watch this film and you're like, man, this first half is great, what was Mike talking about? This is what I'm talking about, because the first half is great. And now we got to get to my negatives. The first negative I have is obviously going to be the back half of this film, but I'll elaborate a little bit more. There's just too much exposition in the back half of this film. So once they get out of the concert, and I won't go into spoilers of how they get out or spoilers of what they're doing, but once they get out of the concert, it just changes. Like the whole feeling of the movie changes. It goes from this cat and mouse movie that you were figuring out along with the other characters in this film. You're primarily following Cooper, maybe even Riley, and so you're getting their perspective and you're figuring out this mystery. You're letting it unravel with you, and a good thriller will do that. It'll take you along for the ride. It's not very predictable. But when it gets out of the arena, it's like M. Night just didn't know how to tie this thing up, and so he was like, all right, now I'm just gonna have different cast members explain things to the audience. And that was such a disappointment because the whole movie changes at that point, and you just have the character over here talking to another character and filling you in on so much that I just could have continued to learn as it went. I didn't need these moments, these 10-minute segments between two characters, and they're just talking and explaining everything. And then I did this, and because of this, I did this. And then I was like, are you kidding me? Why are we sitting here and having everything explained to us when you spent the first good half of this film treating it like a thriller where we were figuring things out with the characters? It just bothered me the way that he turned this from a thriller to just sort of an exposition piece, because a good thriller won't do that. It'll continue to unravel until the end. And it just doesn't do that in this movie. That leads me to my next negative, and that this movie goes on for way too long. There are several endings. There is a point of this movie where you're like, oh, well, I guess this is gonna be it. And then it continues. And you're like, all right, well, I guess this is gonna be it. And then it continues again. And then you think it's gonna be over, but guess what? It continues from there all the way to the very end of this film. One of the last moments of this movie, you're like, all right, now it's done. And then it's like, maybe it'll continue. And you're like, please don't. At that point, you're 4 to 5 endings in, and you're just like, please don't continue. I'm done.
I'm done. Do what you want. Pull the plug. I'll kill you.
My last negative is actually going to get into some spoiler territory. So before I go any further, if you are an M. Night Shyamalan fan, you absolutely don't want to know anything more than maybe what the trailers gave you. I am going to warn you here that I am going to throw spoilers up. So I'll even try to throw a spoiler tag there. So now you know there are going to be spoilers from this point till the end of my review. So if you don't want to know anymore, I appreciate you sticking out this long. I completely understand. Go watch Trap and then come back and watch this video. But if you're cool with me spoiling some things, stick around for this last negative, because we got to get into some silly stuff that happens in the last 30 minutes of this film. And honestly, I call it silly stuff because it's stuff that definitely doesn't belong in this movie. So again, one more time, spoilers, I'm just warning you now, but here we go. Toward the end of this movie, it comes down to the serial killer of Cooper being trapped in his house, police surrounding it, and he is looking for a way out. As he's trying to leave the house, the police tase him. Now, this is a serial killer that has butchered over 13 different times. I think it's more than 13 people. Like, there was one crime scene where there was like 4 or 5 bodies. So 13 different crime scenes where he's butchered all these people. And instead of taking him down, they're just like, all right, we're gonna go non-lethal on him. So they all hit him with tasers. And he jumps on one of the cops, even though he's been tasered like 3 times, and he gouges their eyes out. And then he gets up to do it to the next cop, and the FBI profiler, who's this little old lady, who's just been sort of stalking him the whole movie, she is now in the same room with a taser. It's not that there was a lack of police officers and she had to like scramble to grab a taser. No, she was one of the ones that was sent in with the police to tase him and bring him down. And it makes no sense whatsoever. Like, okay, you want to bring in this FBI profiler because there's 3,000 men at this concert and we're trying to find one serial killer. Okay, fine. You want to bring her in to sort of give a little bit of exposition here and there to the audience. Fine, I'm good with it. But when you bring her in as the 4th member of this SWAT brigade to bring down this serial killer that just gouged another guy's eyes out, it makes no sense whatsoever. And that's why I called this negative the silly stuff, because this is like the beginning of some really silly stuff that I noticed in this film, and it gets laughingly bad. So after this moment where they've tased him and he's gone down to the ground, he's gone down to the ground shirtless, but then in a moment later, and they're walking him out to the car, he's got lawn sleeve shirt on. And I thought, that's weird. Why would they let him get redressed? Like, this is a serial killer. This isn't a domestic disturbance or something where it's like, all right, guys, he's calmed down now. No, this is a serial killer who, again, they have said has killed over 13 times, has butchered people. And so this is a serial killer that is basically on their most wanted list. They've already gone non-lethal on him for whatever reason, but now they've let him get dressed. And it's just like, I've seen enough episodes of Cops. There's no way they'd have let this guy put his shirt back on. But they do, so something else that's silly can happen here in a second. So he gets his shirt on, they're walking him out, he's handcuffed in the front, which again, I don't know why, but he's handcuffed in the front, and he's OCD throughout this film, so he decides to stop and pick up a bike and then fix this bike because the bike's laying down, and since he's OCD, he needs it to be stood up. And the cops They just let him. Yeah, it took him forever to catch him in this film. He keeps getting away out of these situations, and they went non-lethal, brought in an old lady, let him put a shirt on, and then they're like, yeah, you can fix this bike that's on your front lawn, but it's important because that leads to another silly thing here in a minute. So he fixes this bike, and then they almost have him to the police car, and the police are like, this is a good time to let his kids out of the car. So his son and daughter, his daughter being Riley, get out of the car, and Riley runs over to give him a hug. And the police are like, no, we're not gonna let you do that, right? Because this is a serial killer who's butchered over 13 times. We've already covered this. But the old lady, the profiler, she goes, no, let him. And so Riley gives him a big hug, and he gives her a big hug back. And you're just like, there's no possible scenario where the police would let this happen. There's no scenario where this happens. This is beyond believability at this point. So she gives him this big hug. She walks away crying. They put him inside of this police wagon. They lock the door. And of course, nobody else is back there with him, because the final silly thing to happen in this film is that while he was fixing that bike, he pulled the bike spoke out, slipped it into his long sleeve shirt that they conveniently let him put on before they took him away. And then he pulls it out and starts to undo his handcuffs and laugh. Now, great performance from Josh Hartnett. I've already talked about that. I have no issue with his performance, but how they got to this moment in the film before it cuts out and goes to the end credits just blows my mind. It was silly thing after silly thing after silly thing, unbelievable thing after unbelievable thing after unbelievable thing. And keep in mind, all of this happens after some things that I won't spoil, I won't go into, these situations he never should have gotten out of in the first place. He gets out of like 6 situations where they're taking lethal shots at him. But then when it comes down to the end of the film and they've got him actually cornered and they've got him in the sights, they go non-lethal so they can do this ending. This silly ending. But that's the end of my spoilers. I'm not trying to make this a very negative review. I just wanted to point out some of the silliness that was in this film. Overall, I will say that if you're a huge M. Night Shyamalan fan, maybe go check this one out in theaters. You might enjoy it. If you like to watch for when M. Night's gonna pop up in the film and be a big part of this movie, well then it's there for you and you might enjoy it. Would I recommend you go see this film otherwise? No, I would say wait for this one on streaming. I'd say save your money, wait till it's streaming on one of the services that you're already paying for, and maybe check it out there if that's something that you're excited about. But ultimately, it's not a movie that I recommend. It's not a movie I'll go back to, and that's just unfortunate. Because again, I want to enjoy M. Night Shyamalan films, but man, if he doesn't stick the landing, his movies completely fall apart for me. But those are just my opinions because that's my review for Trap. Guys, if you had a chance to see this movie yet, if you have, let me know in the comment section down below. Let me know what you enjoyed about it, what you didn't like about it. Maybe we agree or disagree on some things. Maybe the back half of this film really worked for you, and if it did, I'd love to know in the comment section. I have a feeling we're going to be pretty aligned on this though, because this just not a great film. But with that said though, guys, if you like this video and you want to watch more, don't forget to hit the like button because it helps the video, it helps the channel, and it helps me right here. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time. Alright guys, we got to the end of my Trap movie review, and while this wasn't my favorite movie of the year, and definitely not my favorite Shyamalan film, I think there was enough good in it so that I enjoyed the fact that I went and saw this thing, and I loved making this review, so if nothing else, that's a great consolation prize. With that said, if you liked this video and you want to check out any of the other content on my channel, well, I've got all of my horror movie reviews right there, and I've got all of my 2024 movie reviews right there.